June 14, 1943. A hot, sun-baked morning in the Arizona desert. At a remote train station, the air trembles with heat and the rattle of iron wheels. A long line of German soldiers shuffles off boxcars, their uniforms dusty and stiff, hands stuffed into pockets, eyes scanning a landscape that seems endless. Sagebrush stretching to the horizon, cacti casting sharp shadows. These are men trained to fight across Europe, hardened in winter campaigns, now confronted with an enemy far stranger than the Allies, the silence and emptiness of the American West. Expectations and reality collided here like dust storms on the plains. The soldiers had braced for brutal confinement, the snarling guards, and the cruelty of enemy territory. Instead, they found themselves in wide-open camps under sprawling skies, with desert heat beating down on barbed wire fences. The American military, keen to solve a labor shortage, had transported over 425,000 German prisoners to U.S. soil, with roughly 10,000 scattered across the Southwest. The sheer absurdity of it, soldiers in full uniform clutching letters from home, learning to cope with dust storms rather than artillery fire, would not be lost on them. At Camp Papago Park near Phoenix, the infrastructure was simple but secure. Low barracks, guard towers, and stretches of fenced desert. Daily routines were organized with the precision of military efficiency. Roll calls, morning inspections, labor assignments, all mirrored the discipline they had known in Europe. And yet, there was a twist. The work was not sabotage or drills, but farming and construction. The men tended crops, repaired fences, and dug irrigation channels, their hands blackened with soil instead of gunpowder. One diary entry from a POW reads, "I never imagined we would spend our days hoeing potatoes under this merciless sun. Yet the bread tastes better than at home." The contrast could not have been more striking. These were men trained to storm bunkers, now marching in formation behind a sergeant who wielded a hoe instead of a rifle. Attempts to escape, when they came, were often comic misadventures. In one instance, a small group tried to tunnel out under cactus-laden ground. The tunnel collapsed almost immediately, leaving them covered in desert dirt and sheepish apologies to guards who could hardly conceal their amusement. Daily life blended monotony with subtle surprises. Meals were abundant compared to what many soldiers had known during wartime rationing. Beans simmering in iron pots, cornbread steaming in the dry heat, iced lemonade. Luxuries in a desert that topped 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Soldiers marveled at the irony, sent to a foreign land to be punished, yet fed and sheltered as if guests. Many recorded their astonishment. "We are prisoners, yet we eat better than some of the locals," one man noted dryly. Humor, often understated, crept in where it could. German soldiers in neat rows during roll call would sometimes march in circles, while nearby cows looked on with apparent disdain. Discipline persisted, yes, but so did small moments of absurdity, a reminder that the desert held not just barbed wire, but the occasional wink of human comedy. Friendships began to form in unexpected ways. A young POW struggled to milk a cow under the watchful eye of a rancher's daughter. English words were fumbling, hands were clumsy, yet laughter bridged the gap between captor and captive. Letters sent home hinted at a strange camaraderie that could never have been predicted. The men here are kind, the sun unrelenting, and yet I have learned more about kindness than in any barracks or town in Germany. Over weeks, the ideological rigidity of war softened under the weight of dust and sun. Soldiers who had arrived with fear and suspicion began to recognize Americans as individuals, neighbors, farmers, sometimes even friends. The initial shock of captivity gave way to the surreal realization that the desert, with all its barrenness, was teaching lessons that no European battlefield ever could: endurance, humility, and the faint but persistent possibility of human connection. And yet, this was only the beginning. The desert was wide, the fences tall, and the world beyond the camp uncertain. What came next? Unexpected encounters, cross-cultural friendships, and moments that defied the grim expectations of war, would challenge both prisoners and locals in ways no one could have imagined. By mid-1944, life in the desert camps had settled into a strange rhythm. Barbed wire still ringed the barracks, but the sharp edges of fear had dulled. Outside the fences, the American West stretched wide, golden under the sun, with ranches, dusty trails, and occasional outposts of civilization. German POWs, once hardened soldiers, now learned to navigate this unexpected world, riding horses, tending fields, and most surprisingly, sharing in the local culture. Expectations continued to collide with reality. POWs had anticipated hatred, suspicion, and strict confinement. Americans had imagined men filled with resentment, scheming for escape or mischief. Instead, what emerged was a curious mix of cooperation, shared labor, and subtle friendship. Local ranchers, pressed by wartime labor shortages, quickly realized that these disciplined, strong men were valuable additions to their workforce. They could mend fences, plow fields, and harvest crops with a precision that often surpassed the local's own. In one vivid example, a rancher noted in his diary, "I feared spies, but I found workers who never complained about sun or dust." The camps themselves became stages for cultural exchange. On weekends, POWs attended small celebrations, sometimes even 4th of July events. They watched parades with wide-eyed astonishment, learning that fireworks could dazzle without destruction. Cowboys taught them to ride, occasionally lending a horse or two for short laps across the dusty plains. Some men taught locals simple German songs. Others shared stories of towns and traditions far away, creating a strange, poignant bridge between worlds at war. Escape attempts, once thrilling in theory, often revealed the absurdity of the situation. In 1944, 25 POWs tunneled under the fence at Camp Papago Park, only to wander in circles across the desert. They were caught hours later, tired, sunburned, and sheepishly laughing at the irony. The event became a local legend, recounted with good-natured humor. Former enemies, chasing freedom in a land they barely understood, defeated by sand, cactus, and the relentless sun. Statistics offer a sobering but fascinating glimpse into the scale of labor. POWs in the Southwest contributed to the production of millions of pounds of vegetables, fruits, and livestock, easing the strain on American farmers. Vivid images emerge: rows of corn taller than the soldiers themselves, cattle grazing under orange sunsets, and the relentless sun baking adobe barracks and barrens alike. One former POW reflected, "I planted more corn in a single season than I ever saw at home, and the sun never stopped watching." Yet these were not merely laborers, they were human beings, forging connections in unexpected ways. Letters sent home brimmed with anecdotes of shared laughter and minor triumphs. One POW described a poker game under the stars with a cowboy, cigars dangling, mispronounced English mingling with German, arguments erupting over trivial rules, yet dissolving into laughter. Another recounted lessons in line dancing, his boots 2 sizes too large, twisting on dusty wood floors as locals cheered. Humor, subtle and pervasive, punctuated life behind the fences. The once feared enemy now argued over horseshoe scores and the correct method to fry bacon. German efficiency collided with cowboy improvisation, sometimes resulting in frustration, sometimes in absurd hilarity. A camp historian later noted, "It was the strangest piece I've ever seen. Fences kept them in, but laughter kept them together." By 1946, as the war ended and POWs were repatriated, the emotional transformation was unmistakable. Both sides had learned lessons impossible to quantify. Americans discovered humanity and resilience in those they had once deemed enemies. POWs left with stories of wide skies, generous hosts, and the odd fondness for cowboy hats and cornbread. Some remained in correspondence with former neighbors, proof that even the harsh deserts of Arizona could cultivate friendship alongside crops. The desert, once a symbol of confinement, had revealed itself as a crucible of understanding. Barbed wire no longer symbolized fear, but boundaries softened by shared labor, laughter, and the unexpected poetry of ordinary life. For a few years, the American West had been a meeting place of worlds, a place where cowboys and soldiers, enemies by law, found common ground in sunlight, soil, and eventually barbecue smoke drifting over fences. In the end, the story of these POWs is not merely about captivity or labor, but about the surprising resilience of human connection. The American West, with all its heat, dust, and wide-open sky, became a classroom for empathy, a stage for irony, and a home, brief, improbable, unforgettable, for those who walked its deserts, not as invaders or captors, but as human beings learning together to survive and occasionally to laugh.